Well, hello there, squirrels. I can't find my other Kindle. My newest one that I usually read from. Thank goodness I got this back up. I think I have Poltergeist. Chapter 15. Miss Marple oh, maybe it's in here. I'll look later. I have this thing pulled down off the... Woo! Don't have my lights on back here. Must have ambiance. Besides, up there. And you're supposed to be pointing that way, shining on my sign. 15. Of the body in the library. Excuse me. Miss Marple passed out through the French window. Went out. Through the French windows of her drawing room, tripped down her neat garden path, through a garden gate, in through the vicarage garden gate, across the vicarage garden, and up to the drawing room window, where she tapped gently on the pane. The vicar was busy in his study composing his Sunday sermon, but the vicar's wife, who was young and pretty, was admiring the progress of her offspring across the hearth rug. Progress of her offspring? Can I come in, Griselda? Oh, do, Miss Marple. Just look at David. He gets so angry because he can only crawl in reverse. I got a baby. He wants to get to something, and the more he tries, the more he goes backwards into the coal box. He's looking very bonny, Griselda. He's not bad, is he? Said the young mother, endeavoring to assume an indifferent manner. Of course I don't bother with him much. All the books say a child should be left alone as much as possible. What? Very wise, dear, said Miss Marple. I came to ask if there was anything special you're collecting for at the moment. The vicar's wife turned somewhat astonished eyes upon her. Oh, heaps of things, she said cheerfully. There always are. She ticked them off on her fingers. There's the Nave Restoration Fund, and St. Giles Mission, and our sale of work next Wednesday, and the Unmarried Mothers, and a Boy Scouts outing, and the Needlework Guild, and the Bishop's Appeal for Deep-Sea Fishermen. Any of them will do, said Miss Marple. I thought I might make a little round with a book, you know, if you would authorize me to do so. Are you up to something? I believe you are. Of course I authorize you. Make it the sale of work. It would be lovely to get some real money instead of those awful sachets and comic pen wipers and depressing children's frocks and dusters all done up to look like dolls. I suppose, continued Griselda, accompanying her guest to the window, you wouldn't like to tell me what it's all about? Later, my dear, said Miss Marple, hurrying off. With a sigh, the young mother returned to the hearth rug, and by way of carrying out her principles of stern neglect, butted her son 3 times in the stomach so that he caught hold of her hair and pulled it with gleeful yells. Then they rolled over and over in a grand rough and tumble until the door opened and the vicarage maid announced to the most influential parishioner, who didn't like children, Mrs. is in here. Whereupon Griselda sat up and tried to look dignified and more what a vicar's wife should be. Miss Marple, clasping a small black book with penciled entries in it, walked briskly along the village street until she came to the crossroads. Here she turned to the left and walked past the Blue Boar until she came to Chatsworth, alias Mr. Booker's new house. She turned in at the gate, walked up to the front door, and knocked briskly. The door was opened by the blonde young woman named Dinah Lee. She was less carefully made up than usual, and in fact looked slightly dirty. She was wearing gray slacks and an emerald jumper. "Good morning," said Miss Marple briskly and cheerfully. "May I just come in for a minute?" She pressed forward as she spoke, so that Dinah Lee, who was somewhat taken aback at the call, had no time to make up her mind. "Thank you so much," said Miss Marple, beaming amiably at her, and sitting down rather gingerly on a period bamboo chair. "Quite warm for the time of year, is it not?" went on Miss Marple, still exuding geniality. "Yes, rather. Oh, quite," said Miss Lee. At a loss how to deal with the situation, she opened a box and offered it to her guest. Have a cigarette?" "Thank you so much, but I don't smoke. I just called, you see, to see if I could enlist your help for our sale of work next week." "Sale of work?" said Dinah Lee, as one who repeats a phrase in a foreign language. "At the vicarage," said Miss Marple, "next Wednesday." Oh, Miss Lee's mouth fell open. "I'm afraid I couldn't." "Not even a small subscription? Half a crown, perhaps?" Miss Marple exhibited her little book. Well, yes, I dare say I could manage that." The girl looked relieved and turned to hunt in her handbag. Miss Marple's sharp eyes were looking round the room. She said, "I see no hearth rug in front of the fire." Dinah Lee turned round and stared at her. She could not but be aware of the very keen scrutiny the old lady was giving her, but it aroused in her no other emotion than slight annoyance. Miss Marple recognized that. She said, "It's rather dangerous, you know. Sparks fly out and mark the carpet." "Funny old Tabby," thought Dinah, but she said quite amiably, if somewhat vaguely, "There used to be one. I don't know where it's got to." "I suppose," said Miss Marple, "it was the fluffy, woolly kind." "Sheep," said Dinah. "That's what it looked like." She was amused now, an eccentric old bean, this. She held out a half-crown. "Here you are," she said. "Oh, thank you, my dear." Miss Marple took it and opened the little book. What name shall I write down?" Dinah's eyes grew suddenly hard and contemptuous. "Nosy old cat," she thought. "That's all she came for, prying around for scandal." She said clearly and with malicious pleasure, "Miss Dinah Lee." Miss Marple looked at her steadily. She said, "This is Mr. Basil Blake's cottage, isn't it?" "Yes, and I'm Miss Dinah Lee." Her voice rang out challengingly. Her head went back. Her blue eyes flashed. Very steadily Miss Marple looked at her. She said, "Will you allow me to give you some advice, even though you may consider it impertinent?" "I shall consider it impertinent. You had better say nothing." "Nevertheless," said Miss Marple, "I'm going to speak. I want to advise you very strongly not to continue using your maiden name in the village." Dinah stared at her. She said, "What? What do you mean?" Miss Marple said earnestly, "In a very short time you may need all the sympathy and goodwill you can find. It will be important to your husband, too, that he shall be well thought of. There is a prejudice in old-fashioned country districts against people living together who are not married. It has amused you both, I dare say, to pretend that that is what you are doing. It kept people away so that you weren't bothered with what I expect you would call old frumps. Nevertheless, old frumps have their uses." Dinah demanded, "How did you know we are married?" Miss Marple smiled a deprecating smile. "Oh, my dear," she said. Dinah persisted, "No, but how did you know? You didn't go to Somerset House." A momentary flicker showed in Miss Marple's eyes. "Somerset House? Oh, no, but it was quite easy to guess. Everything, you know, gets round in a village. The kind of quarrels you have, typical of early days of marriage, quite unlike an illicit relationship. It has been said, you know, and I think quite truly, that you can only really get under somebody's skin if you're married to them. When there is no legal bond, people are much more careful. They have to keep assuring themselves how happy excuse me, everything is. They have, you see, to justify themselves. They dare not quarrel. Married people, I've noticed, quite enjoy their battles and the appropriate reconciliations. She paused, twinkling benignly. Well, Dinah stopped and laughed. She sat down and lit a cigarette. You're absolutely marvelous, she said. Then she went on. But why did you want us to own up and admit to respectability? Miss Marple's face was grave. She said, because any minute now your husband may be arrested for murder. For several moments Dinah stared at her, and then she said incredulously, Basil? Murder? Are you joking? No, indeed. Haven't you seen the papers? Dinah caught her breath. You mean that girl at the Majestic Hotel? Do you mean they suspect Basil of killing her? Yes. But it's nonsense. There was the whir of a car outside, the bang of a gate. Basil Blake flung open the door and came in carrying some bottles. He said, Got the gin and the vermouth, did you? He stopped and turned incredulous eyes on the prim, erect visitor. Dinah burst out breathlessly. Is she mad? She says you're going to be arrested for the murder of that girl, Ruby King. Oh, God, said Basil Blake. The bottles dropped from his arms onto the sofa. He reeled to a chair and dropped down in it and buried his face in his hands. He repeated, Oh, my God, oh, my God. Dinah darted over to him. She caught his shoulders. Basil, look at me. It isn't true. I know it isn't true. I don't believe it for a moment. His hands went up and gripped hers. Bless you, darling. But why should they think? You didn't even know her, did you? Oh, yes, he knew her, said Miss Marple. Basil said fiercely, Be quiet, you old hag. Listen, Dinah, darling, I hardly knew her at all. Just ran across her once or twice at the Majestic, that's all. I swear that's all. Dinah said, bewildered, I don't understand. Why should anyone suspect you then? Basil groaned. He put his hands over his eyes and rocked to and fro. Miss Marple said, What did you do with the hearth rug? His reply came mechanically. I put it in the dustbin. Miss Marple clucked her tongue vexedly. That was stupid, very stupid. People don't put good hearth rugs in dustbins. It had spangles in it from her dress, I suppose. Yes, I couldn't get them out. Dinah cried, But what are you both talking about? Basil said sullenly, Ask her. She seems to know all about it. I'll tell you what I think happened, if you like, said Miss Marple. You can correct me, Mr. Blake, if I go wrong. I think that after having had a violent quarrel with your wife at a party, and having had perhaps rather too much to drink, you drove down here. I don't know what time you arrived, Basil Blake said sullenly, about 2 a.m. I meant to go up to town first. Then when I got to the suburbs, I changed my mind. I thought Dinah might come down here after me, so I drove down here. The place was all dark. I opened the door and turned on the light, and I saw... He gulped and stopped. Miss Marple went on. You saw a girl lying on the hearth rug, a girl in a white evening dress, strangled. I don't know whether you recognized her then. Basil Blake shook his head violently. I couldn't look at her after the first glance. Her face was all blue, swollen. She'd been dead some time, and she was there in my room. He shuddered. Miss Marple said gently, You weren't, of course, quite yourself. You were in a fuddled state, and your nerves are not good. You were, I think, panic-stricken. You didn't know what to do. I thought Dinah might turn up any minute, and she'd find me there with a dead body, a girl's dead body, and she'd think I'd killed her. Then I got an idea. It seemed, I don't know why, a good idea at the time. I thought, I'll put her in old Bantry's library, damn pompous old stick, always looking down his nose, sneering at me as artistic and effeminate. Serve the pompous old brute right, I thought. He'll look a fool when a dead lovely is found on his hearthrug. He added with a pathetic eagerness to explain. I was a bit drunk, you know, at the time. It really seemed positively amusing to me. Old Bantry with a dead blonde. Yes, yes, said Miss Marple. Little Tommy Bond had very much the same idea, rather a sensitive boy with an inferiority complex. He said teacher was always picking on him. He put a frog in the clock and it jumped out at her. You were just the same, went on Miss Marple, only of course bodies are more serious matters than frogs. Basil groaned again. By the morning I'd sobered up. I realized what I'd done. I was scared stiff, and then the police came here. Another damned pompous ass of a chief constable. I was scared of him, and the only way I could hide it was by being abominably rude. In the middle of it all, Dinah drove up. Dinah looked out the window. She said, "There's a car driving up now. There are men in it." "The police, I think," said Miss Marple. Basil Blake got up. Suddenly he became quite calm and resolute. He even smiled. He said, so I'm for it, am I? All right, Dinah, sweet. Keep your head. Get on to old Sims. He's the family lawyer. And go to Mother and tell her everything about our marriage. She won't bite. And don't worry, I didn't do it, so it's bound to be all right. See, sweetheart? There was a tap on the cottage door. Basil called, "Come in." Inspector Slack entered with another man. He said, "Mr. Basil Blake?" "Yes." "I have a warrant here for your arrest on the charge of murdering Ruby Keene on the night of September 21st last. I warn you that anything you say may be used at your trial. You will please accompany me now. Full facilities will be given you for communicating with your solicitor." Basil nodded. He looked at Dinah but did not touch her. He said, "So long, Dinah." Cool customer, thought Inspector Slack. He acknowledged the presence of Miss Marple with a half bow and a good morning, and thought to himself, "Smart old pussy, she's on to it. Good job we've got that hearthrug, that and finding out from the car park man at the studio that he left that party at 11 instead of midnight. Don't think those friends of his meant to commit perjury. They were bottled." And Blake told him firmly the next day it was 12 o'clock when he left, and they believed him. Well, his gooses cooked good and proper. Mental, I expect. Broadmoor not hanging. First the Reeves kid probably strangled her. Drove her out to the quarry, walked back into Dannemouth, picked up his own car in some side lane, drove to this party, then back to Dannemouth, brought Ruby Keene out here, strangled her, put her in old Bantry's library, then probably got the wind up about the cat in the quarry car in the quarry, drove there, set it on fire, and got back here. Mad, sex and bloodlust. Lucky this girl's escaped. What they call recurring mania, I expect. Alone with Miss Marple, Dinah Blake turned to her. She said, "I don't know who you are, but you've got to understand this. Basil didn't do it," Miss Marple said. "I know he didn't. I know who did it. But it's not going to be easy to prove. I've an idea that something you said just now may help. It gave me an idea, the connection I'd been trying to find. Now, what was it?" And that's all. Y'all, help me pray. I find my other Kindle. So weird. I always put in this caddy up here. Well, I'll find it. And thank goodness I have a spare. Look at the little stickers I put on there. The hook nut is where I got these. Where are they? Yeah, these hooks. And I've got a clear one. Those are the only ones I have. I like them. A lot of people don't. I do. Okay, we all have a happy Friday night, and I'm going to see what I can get up to. Hopefully work on some stuff and not fall asleep. Love y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. I'll see you in the YT streets. And remember, I'm on Saturday and Sundays 2 hours earlier. Set an alarm, 3 bells Eastern. Did I say be sweet, don't be ugly? Probably. Bye.